we met through Homer Luther. Yeah, we have a common connection from the mountaineering world. And Homer Luther is, I mean, they've always had a connection to Latin America. And Homer Luther was a mountaineering buddy of mine, and whose father served on the board of the National Outdoor Leadership School. And I guess his father was head of the U.S. Park Service, or he was a big environmentalist under thing. I know his father ran the Republican convention in 1988.
Yeah, that's right. He was a Nixon Republican, but I think in spite of that, he was a big outdoorsy guy.
He was a big. But through him, we met, but I had heard about Uphold and Halsey Minor, and that Uphold was really the first company to really get that it wasn't just crypto. It was crypto plus fiat plus commodities, that the world was moving toward a tokenized view of value. And JP was just part of that organization. So when I heard about Uphold, I just wanted to learn more, and I just started meeting the people. But I had an independent, introduction through Homer.
Yeah, I think that squares absolutely.
I mean, part of it is like Uphold, and JP, we didn't really talk about this, but like it's a great product for people that live in countries where their own currency gets debased, and people want to like move from their local currency to a more inflation-proof currency, whether that's crypto or just another fiat currency.
Yeah.
And so your Argentina roots is, you've seen it firsthand when a country debases the currency.
Oh, for sure. I mean, in the sense that the joke I make is that the world is turning Argentine.
Howdy, folks, and welcome to podcast number 2. Today I'm talking with JP, head of Uphold, and I'm going to switch it over right now and give an introduction. JP, where are you sitting today?
I'm sitting in lovely Uruguay in the middle of summer.
Now, Uphold's not down there. Do give me a little bit of background of where is Uphold located, both its headquarters and where's its key people, because I think that's an interesting story in itself.
Sure. So our biggest office is in Braga, Portugal, which is a little north of Porto. That is, I don't know, maybe 80% of the company is there. So that's sort of the cultural heart of Uphold, if you will. Then we have a bunch of people in London, New York, and San Francisco. And I think, that about covers it. We have odd, country managers and sort of, frontiers people in disparate places, but the major hubs are those.
And talk a little bit about the scope of what Uphold actually covers and is, and how it's different from other wallets and exchanges out there in the marketplace.
Sure. So, I think, well, first off, it's a term you hear thrown around, and I think it has some significance. But the term I'd use is, crypto native, in the sense that I think you can still divide the world up into, sort of legacy framework on one side of the page, crypto on the other, and fintech encompasses both. But you have companies like TransferWise or Currency Cloud or whatever that are inherently, PayPal itself would be the first and most important, incremental improvements on the legacy, 5-party payment system part of the world. Bitcoin and crypto are on the other side of the world, and we were born there. So these things converge in the middle. There's obviously a lot of millennial demand for things like crypto, and so traditional, again, incremental players like PayPal are bolting these capabilities on. But we're coming at it from the other direction. We started with Bitcoin, and now we're looking to get more main market with things like equities and commodities and fiat currencies and the like, which obviously are resident on the other side of the world.
And your coverage, I know you're in, I think, pretty much servicing customers all around the world. Talk a little bit about that, because that in itself is interesting. And And I believe were you born in the U.S. or you're from overseas as well, from your origins?
I am indeed. I'm from Argentina. Uphold has clients in 182 countries. We can service anybody who's not in an OFAC country, which would be North Korea or Iran, or a couple of others that are on the blacklists for the United States and Europe. But otherwise, we have clients everywhere. We have a disproportionate number of clients in Latin America relative to, say, our competitors like a Coinbase or a Revolut. So our product has resonated in those places where the local currency is such a disaster that an appetite for hard currencies like the U.S. dollar or better stores of value like gold or Bitcoin have different dimensions than they might for people living in the United States or Europe.
Wow. And so what's sort of the range? Like you mentioned gold, you mentioned, I think you mentioned securities, but just give a little feel for like what the breadth is of product offering on Uphold.
Sure. So we started, I think we were the first, long before anybody heard the term stablecoin. We were the first people to put dollars, pounds, euros on crypto rails. And amusingly, and as a sort of testament to how attitudes change over time, we were told that if we put our closed loop dollars that sat on crypto rails outside of our ecosystem, that we'd be taken to the slammer, because folks in the past had issued private dollars or things that walked and quacked like dollars, and the government didn't take kindly to somebody usurping their seigniorage in those types of situations, and there was plenty of legal precedent. Now, that was 7 years ago. That attitude has changed to where a stable coin is no different than prepaid open loop credit, the nature of which you might pick off of a shelf in the form of a prepaid MasterCard as you're leaving Home Depot. So the thinking has drifted, but we were really, really early, and that's where we started with the fiat currencies, and obviously Bitcoin itself, and ultimately ETH and XRP and so forth. So today, I think we have 6 tiers of assets on the platform. There's the fiat currencies, where we are connected to the local banking rails, which means that people can deposit and withdraw those fiats. Those would include dollars, pounds, euros, and Chinese yuan. Then there's fiat currencies where we're really just providing a sort of hedging service. So you can, if you wanted to hedge out Israeli shekels or Kenyan shillings or more exotic currencies, we allow folks to participate in those, but we don't support deposits and withdrawals. Then there's crypto, where we have full integration with those blockchains. Those would include the Bitcoins and Ethereums and Litecoins and Ripples. And then there's a tier 4, which is cryptos where, like, again, some of our competitors, eToro and others, you're participating in a unit of account called, Cardano or whatever it might be. So it goes up and down with Cardano, but you can neither deposit nor withdraw it. We're hoping in the next 3 months to make it so that all of our cryptos become full integrations. That's a lot of engineering work, but we're hoping that that'll happen. And then we cover precious metals, and we recently helped create, through an alliance we're a part of, the world's first tokenized carbon credit. So not just pre-existing commodities, but commodities that we're helping to create.
Interesting. And you mentioned XRP. Obviously, there's been a lot of hoopla in the press. I believe some of the other exchanges are pulling back on XRP. Talk a little bit about, just talk about Uphold's historical relationship with XRP and with Ripple, and then bring it up to present and give a little bit of a peek into what you guys are thinking of doing in the future, given all the uncertainty around the XRP and the SEC and Ripple.
Sure. Well, so in terms of our vintage, we were founded or conceived of in 2013. the Bitcoin, I suppose, ecosystem back then was, Coinbase and Ripple and BitPay and a few others, but Ripple, has been an important part of the ecosystem since the very, very early days. And like a lot of constituents in the ecosystem, it's had its ups and downs. And I'm amazed actually by the tribalism sometimes, in the sense that all of us collectively, right, are presumably attempting to feed off of the whale carcasses that should be the banks, right? But as if that weren't enough to busy us all, you get little infighting between the different groups. Ripple has been one of those important groups. I think at some point along the way, they decided they didn't want to pursue, retail users. They were going to focus on a B2B concept and specifically replacing Swift. And in that pursuit, I think it's a noble cause. Correspondent banking hasn't changed a lot since the days of the Medici. There's trillions of dollars laid up in useless nostro vostro setups, and so I think there's a real use case for their main product, if you will. I think the case that the SEC has brought is an interesting one in the sense that, irrespective of whether one is talking about a security or commodity or really anything, fundamental precepts around, trading with asymmetrical information or selectively disclosing are things that you can see how the SEC would not take a kind view. So that's a part of it, and that's the part of it that I think is the one with teeth. The rest of it, is XRP today a security? I think very clearly it is not. And so something that I think you yourself, Greg, brought up in the past, the mission statement of the SEC or high ranking in that multifaceted mission statement is consumer protection. And if you are going to seek to disgorge 1.34 billion that may have been achieved or sold violating, again, some of those concepts of asymmetrical information and selective disclosure, the question is, how much damage are you going to cause to consumers in that pursuit? And I think in this case, the answer has been, a significant amount. It's hard to measure, of course, but obviously it's created a crisis for Ripple and for XRP. Predictably, exchanges like Coinbase, who has to think about the fact that it's going public, although Coinbase has never been a big fan of Ripple's to begin with, but with the additional complication of also being about to go public, that was writing on the wall. So for us, until the complaint is adjudicated against Ripple, specifically citing that XRP is a security today, which would be the part that would affect our business, we're continuing to support. And I think every legal mind that we have interaction with, and I'd like to think we've chosen lawyers well. One of our lawyers is, in fact, the ex-head of the SEC's New York office. All of them feel that it's fairly clear that XRP is not a security today. So we'll wait and see how this thing plays out. But I'd be surprised if there was an outcome that suggested that XRP was a security. And if there were, that wouldn't just be disastrous for XRP. It would be disastrous for dozens and dozens of crypto ecosystems that went through similar trajectories.
Very good. JP, talk a little bit, in addition to having a consumer wallet, you've done a number of interesting business partnerships. I'm not sure which ones you can talk about, but I have to admit the reason I was attracted to Uphold was was because I had lots of portfolio companies that I thought it would behoove them, instead of developing their own wallet from scratch, they could build on top of Uphold, because it already had the expertise, it had the licenses. Talk a little bit about what you're doing in that field.
Sure. So I think our first major partnership of the type you're referring to was with Brave. Probably everybody listening to this is familiar with Brave. Brave is a browser. It was founded by Brendan Eich. Brendan Eich is the inventor of JavaScript. He's also the ex-CEO of Mozilla. And his mission statement is a fairly impressive one, almost a quixotic one if you weren't Brendan Eich, and that is to fix the internet, and fix it specifically by changing the dynamic around how money flows between advertisers, publishers, and us, the end users of the internet, wherein, you know, the first results produced by the Brave browser is that it goes a lot faster than Safari or Chrome, and it provides far greater privacy. So unlike the pre-existing conventional internet consumption experience, where if you say the word, Nike shoes are thrown at you for the next 6 months every time you go to Google, with Brave it doesn't function that way. And if you live in the US or Japan or other more developed economies, I'm not sure how far they've stretched regionally up to this date, you can elect to look at up to 5 ads an hour, and you get paid for that. So Brave is taking 70% of their advertising revenue and giving it back to the end user, paying us for our basic attention, hence the name of their token, Basic Attention Token. Brendan's idea came from, was inspired by Bitcoin, a native currency for the internet as he perceived it. But in terms of actually using Bitcoin, at least looking at things back in 2014, it wasn't scalable. It was way too volatile, way too expensive, et cetera. So he created his own token, but he also found us, again, going back to where we were really, really early with putting dollars, pounds, euros on crypto rails. Brendan identified that the nature of publishers in his ecosystem, which today would include, the UK Guardian, the LA Times, Wikimedia, et cetera, fascinated though they might be by crypto, they need to be able to seamlessly convert things into currencies that they can use to pay their taxes and employees and rent in. So Uphold was really the only game in town doing that in a seamless manner. So that's been a 4-year partnership. It's a very close partnership. Today, Brave users are an important percentage of Uphold's 4.5 million users. And I think it's a relationship that is as exciting as it's been and as successful as it's been is probably in its nascent stages, because where one can get very excited is when you start to think about, balances being in browsers and the world moving to e-commerce. A browser is tomorrow's Rodeo Drive or Madison Avenue in the context of e-commerce. And so there's all sorts of things that can happen when you marry those two things.
That's great. And I think you have another partnership with a gaming company. You want to just comment briefly on that and what that means as a showcase for how the world could operate differently and what developers could build on?
Sure. That one is actually interesting in the sense that I am sure that it would have been front page news for a lot longer than it was, were it not for this enormous crypto bull run we've all been enjoying. But hopefully all of you noticed that the SEC put out, I think to date, its most important no action letter related to crypto, and it was for a company called IMVU. IMVU is the leading avatar-based virtual reality game. It's got more than 8 million monthly active users, and it's got an in-game economy that sees more than 15 million transactions a month. and a number of, I guess call them super users, that are the ones producing the goods and services that are sold in that economy. So in this case, somebody has a nightclub or produces clothes or other, again, goods or services, and they can actually make enough money to make a living in the context of the game. Like with Brave, they were requiring a seamless interface from this closed loop economy to the open loop, if you will, and they, like Brave, found us. Again, the interesting part, taking it back to the SEC and the no action letter, there are lots of games within game economies, many of which are larger than the economy of Iceland. And so one would have thought that, oh my God, here is the killer use case for crypto. And again, I would have thought that there would have been more articles of that nature, out there, or analyses, were it not for this precise moment in the market. But it leads to lots of possibilities. If these guys can do it, presumably all the other gaming ecosystems out there could do it. And again, specifically what's happened here is IMVU has taken their in-game credits and they've been given permission to convert them into a crypto called Vcoin. And Vcoin will be a crypto like so many others out there in the world trading very shortly.
And I think with Bitcoin or any of the other currencies or commodities that you're supporting, you have the ability to essentially swap those or trade those into anything else, including, I believe, not yet approved for the U.S., but outside the U.S. into shares, including fractional shares. You want to give a little bit of color on that? I think some amazing stories of people all around the world being able to participate in equities now.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, I think, we have a more complicated, I've said the word mission statement in the context of this call like 50 times. I'm sorry, it's in my mind, but Uphold's mission statement is democratizing investment. And when you think about the U.S. stock market, which has been such an important historical engine of wealth creation, accessibility outside the United States has been dismal. And today we live in a world where everybody has heard of, Apple or at this point, Tesla or Amazon. And yet if you're a reasonably well-off millennial in a place like Brazil or Chile, you haven't had access. You'd start to get access if you had enough money to be a client of, private banking at Morgan Stanley, but that's not a very broad swath of the population. So we launched fractional U.S. equities in Latin America. It was interesting. We did a webinar. How many people want to learn about investing in equities? 6,000 people showed up. Wow. It was incredibly popular. And what was also interesting is to see what they bought. And I guess not surprisingly, and in step with the U.S. markets, they were buying Tesla from day one. So it was Tesla, Google, and Apple, and everything else a very distant fourth.
And you want to just explain fractional shares, what that means?
Sure. So fractional shares, again, in the vein of democratization, not everybody has $2,000 to buy a share of Amazon or $800 odd to buy a share of Tesla. So with fractional shares, people have the freedom to buy $1 worth or $10 worth. It doesn't need to be a whole share. So again, makes it much more accessible.
Great. So we've been talking a lot about investing, but I think Uphold is increasingly pushing in the ability to send money as well as spend money. Want to comment on that a little bit too?
Yeah, it's this sort of hidden attribute. I suppose maybe a way to think of it is I was a big admirer, I'm going to forget his name, of course, but the guy that was very successful in the early days of cable. He made his fortune buying the railways. And when he sold the railways, he said, but I think I'll keep, the ability to lay lay cable under the tracks. Maybe Greg, you'll remember the guy's name. He was a fairly prominent billionaire a couple of decades back.
But we definitely did it with Sprint. They had the railroads, and that's Sprint was Southern Pacific Railroad, and that's how it got. So people never used to think that the Sprint name was actually derived from Southern Pacific Railroad. You know,
I had no idea. That's interesting. So at any rate,
that dates me a bit, but yes.
So the reason I'm using the analogy is today the revenue generating part of the business and the thing we focus on is really the trading and conversions and that nature of thing. But what Greg's alluding to, and what I imagine one day will be a part of the system that we'll spend more time attempting to monetize, is that anybody can send to anybody 24/7 whatever unit of account they like, which is really very differentiated in the context of the fractional shares we were just talking about. A grandfather could send his grandson, $50 worth of Apple stock from one mobile device to another at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Far as I know, that doesn't exist anywhere, and it's not something we charge anything for. But obviously it goes deep into the realm of remittance and other peer-to-peer payment capabilities that are there and that we don't charge for. So we'll start looking at the value of the cables under the rail cars soon.
Interesting. And so I'm just going to full disclosure here. So I'm an investor in Uphold, which is obviously doing the wallet. With Global ID, we're working on doing identity for Uphold. Uphold is looking at doing the wallet for Global ID, so people who have an identity can have a wallet. Other companies in our portfolio are Apto, which has been doing the card program for us here in the US. I was an investor in Optimus, which Uphold has picked up in Europe, and I am, full disclosure, an investor in Brave. So I like the ecosystem. I mean, it seems exciting to us that, in the future, that really, instead of a big integration like a Brave or a gaming company, we're looking to make it so that any group of people could have like a business account or a group account at Uphold, could be a merchant. And then there could be an on-us network of payors and payees. It's kind of like PayPal all over again, but now with crypto, with securities. And while we're connected to the banks and the card companies, there is a potential that we could go end to end and just stay on the Uphold rails. And that would be low friction, immediate clear and settlement, cutting across currencies. I mean, that's why I'm in the game. What comments on that, or sort of your view? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well, I mean, I think, Greg, obviously you've been among the more visionary and successful investors, probably full stop, but particularly in fintech or regtech or however you want to describe the broader ecosystem. It is the internet, the second coming of the internet. It's clearly the most exciting place to be today. The internet has redefined absolutely every industry except one. And the reason it hadn't redefined finance previously is because of the things that Bitcoin knocked over, right? So once Bitcoin knocked those things over, it's sort of a whole new day. But still today, 12 years in, banks are hanging on to 99% of the value in the world in these siloed buckets of undisclosed risk that don't function very well. So these are really early days. I mean, it's the exact equivalent of being in 1996, looking at early Yahoo, and trying to imagine how that leads to today, Uber or Airbnb or Shazam or whatever. The possibilities are endless, but also in this case, the solving of a lot of acute problems for a lot of people in the world who still have to go to fairly predatory places that are in malls to conduct fairly rudimentary transactions. A lot of efficiencies and improving of the human lot can come out of this.
That's great. What are some of the next things that are coming up in 2021 for Uphold? Like, what sort of floats your boat in terms of things that you don't have but you'd like to have, and you got them in the pipeline?
Yeah, so we just acquired a European cards business. I think cards are an example of something that is absolutely resident over here in the legacy part of the world, but they're also something that takes this sort of ethereal place where I might have interesting investments and makes it day to day meaningful. We have found that where we have cards in a market, use of our platform goes up exponentially. And in the world today, we do not have cards in the same market where, for instance, we have fractional equities. So just getting the breadth of our services out in more places is going to be interesting to begin with. But then also we have some really cool and innovative products that should ship this year that will deliver that crossover even more interestingly, in the sense that today really there's the peer-to-peer inside of our platform, and there's the spendability through a debit card, but those two things exist in isolation. Whereas I think we're going to launch some products this year that will mean that I can pay you whether you have an Uphold account or you don't, and you can pay me whether you have an Uphold account or you don't. And the friction involved on both sides of that is going to be diminished through some pretty cool stuff. So.
And I think we're talking about the ability eventually for people to put their paychecks right into Uphold. And I mean, I guess we're approaching the point at the end of the day, like, what's really the difference between having an Uphold account with all its benefits and still needing a bank account? Like, that people might still have a bank account, but I guess there's a vision that Uphold could be top of wallet as opposed to just a place where you put some of your money to do some speculation.
Absolutely. So that's where all these things are converging, right? The neo banks and the wallets and the crypto exchanges and the Robinhoods of the world are all more or less converging into this one area, wherein I think table stakes for all of those players is, why would you need a bank account, right? In other words, we are at least as good as your legacy bank account, and in that regard, it's everybody feeding off of these big banking whale carcasses, much though I'm sure they wouldn't like to be described that way. That is the opportunity.
Finally, I think we're going to begin to run into our 45 minutes here. Anything else you'd like to add that I didn't ask you about Uphold, or anything you'd like to ask me back or put me on the spot on?
Well, I guess I always like predictions. How do you predict the SEC XRP complaint is going to wind up?
Well, I'm a terrible predictor, but I'm a good hoper, and obviously I hope that what the SEC is going to come to is they're going to come to their senses and realize that XRP is not a security. I think they could still put out guidance for folks that when you create a company, like when you create a gold mine, people understand what the gold mine is, and they understand that that's separate from the gold. The gold mine can still say intelligent things about gold and what it thinks is going to happen, but people, I believe, are intelligent enough to understand the difference between a gold mine and gold, and they ought to be intelligent enough to understand the difference between Ripple, which is a company that has this mission of competing and creating an alternative to Swift, and XRP, which might fit into Ripple's mission, but might have many, many other uses as well as to other cryptos. And so what I'm hoping for and believing should happen is that the SEC should give guidance as to what are good disclosures for anything that is a security, or even if it is a company that is a security like Ripple, what are good disclosures for the part of the business that are not a security, which is the currency or token that it creates. And this clarity is needed not just for Ripple, but it's needed for Filecoin, it's needed for Stellar, it's needed for Brave, it's needed for every place and situation where there's a company and a token. We can't live in a world where it's just a Tony Soprano world, where the SEC just shakes down the biggest player in the room because it feels it can get the biggest settlement. It needs to actually be a rule-making organization, not an after the fact come to the party 8 years later and basically just create chaos across the whole segment, destroy value for investors and retard capital formation. And so I'm hoping that saner minds prevail and we get rulemaking instead of enforcement actions on the last day of the mentorship or the leadership of an organization during a time of change of administrations. And so that's more hope than prediction. My real predictions are like, I never would have predicted that Bitcoin would have pierced $40,000 this year. I'm happy because I won a bet, I think it's for a lunch over my CEO, as to whether, who owes who more money, and it's all based around the price of Bitcoin. And so when Bitcoin got a bit beyond 10,000, I think I was in the green on my bet, but now I'm way in the green. And so I'm not looking for radically surging prices, but I do believe my prediction is, as long as governments are debasing their national currencies by turning on the printing press, that net crypto overall should do well relative to assets which are debasable. And that I do believe, I think crypto went, as a total value, it went past $1 trillion. I don't think, while there might be setbacks, I think crypto's here to stay. And even when Chase, which had Jamie Dimon, who criticized Bitcoin as a fraud, is now predicting Bitcoin prices in excess of 6 figures, I think that the mainstream media is learning to accommodate that crypto is going to be here. And I hope 2021 is the year that we get out of turf battles between the SEC, the IRS, and the FinCEN, the OCC, the Fed. That's just in the US. I hope that sanity comes to the US and we begin to act more like, other countries that have regulators getting their act together, rather than sowing and creating confusion in the marketplace. That's more of a hope than a prediction, but I'm an optimist, so I hope my hopes become predictions. And you, JP, anything you wanted to comment on the market or any odds you're taking on handicapping?
Well, sure. Yeah. So I guess I'll start with your last point. So today, as we had a really interesting conversation with the CFTC, and I don't know if they're separate or more visionary or more relaxed, but I actually found it to be a very engaging two-way conversation, and they were interestingly forthcoming. We really care about climate change, or it was not a type of conversation we'd had with another type of regulator in the past. So that was nice. And then on the run in Bitcoin, there was a conversation I had the other day, because a couple of things have happened apart from the surge to 40,000 that have surprised me. And one of them is that surge has happened while gold has diminished. And as came up in a conversation, what you realize about Bitcoin is that there is no elasticity on the supply side. With all other commodities, there is. If gold goes to 5,000, then you have marginal, gold mining operations that all of a sudden kick in that wouldn't be feasible at $1,800 gold or $2,000 gold. With Bitcoin, it doesn't matter. You can have, $2,000 or $200,000 Bitcoin. The same amount's going to be produced, which is whatever the number is, 6.5 every block, and that number is going to diminish, and the last Bitcoin is going to roll off the assembly line in 2140 or whenever the hell it is. So I'm not sure, or it hadn't occurred to me that is not true of any other commodity to speak of. Again, oil gets more expensive, marginal oil reserves are tapped. Same with any other commodity you can think of. Not true of a math-based currency, and so that may contribute to its relative appreciation versus some of these other more traditional hedges against currency debasement.
I saw the New York Times article today about Stefan Thomas, who's one of our board members and strategic partners, former chief technology officer for Ripple. But I hadn't thought about it. I remember that early conversation when Stefan mentioned that he had a hard disk where he had his keys for some of his Bitcoin holdings, and he couldn't remember the password. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but I read in today's article that it's holding the keys for 7,000 Bitcoin. And so he has 10 tries. He's used 8. He has 2 more tries. And if he misses those 2 tries, I think that's $220 million that's gone down the gurgler. But yes, there's 21 million Bitcoin, but that's 21 million if everyone can remember their keys. With Stefan and anybody else who's forgotten keys on those early days, I guess the number's like less. It makes it even more deflationary.
Right. Exactly.
So that is a strange factor in driving value as well. That I hadn't really thought about it, but yes, it's a completely inelastic commodity, and so there you go. But it's been a wild year. I do believe Uphold is seen, as other crypto organizations have, a big uptake in in the wallets, and yes, I hadn't really thought about that, but gold has been relatively stagnant as Bitcoin has taken off, and so these things aren't necessarily correlated. Sometimes they're reverse correlated.
Yeah, no, really, really interesting. I think finally, though, earlier in the year when the pandemic came and there was a sort of global margin call, it seemed that Bitcoin was unnaturally tracking with the U.S. equities markets, and now I think it is tracking inverse to the dollar. So there was news around the dollar strengthening, Bitcoin weakened. That is the correct correlation. So it's getting into its groove.
All right. Well, let's check back at the end of 2021, and we'll see what other things have surprised us this year. Thank you, JP, for your time. Thank you, Alec, and folks, look forward to the next podcast 2 weeks from now. Take care. Happy sailing. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, all. Take care.